Shin Nun, where the Rebbe speaks about a lot about his mother, the Rebbe Chana, whose yahrzeit is Vav Tishrei, whose yahrzeit is today, connects with the Haftorah about Chana in the first day of Rosh Hashanah, and the connection with Moshiach, and also speaks a lot about his mother's involvement in helping out her husband, the Rebbe's father, in spreading Yiddishkeit and Chassidus throughout the entire world. And the beginning, the first part of the Sicha, the Rebbe speaks about how, even though in Tanya it speaks about that a tzaddik, when they pass away, affects Yeshua, the day of their yahrzeit, has to do with affecting salvations b'kerev ha'aretz. But in truth, this is in a microcosm by every Yid, and especially someone who influenced and had a connection with the whole world, because that's what happened with the Rebbe Chana, that because she made sure that her husband's Torah was printed and transcribed, etc., etc., so her influence is not just local, but global, because she affected the entire world. So therefore, the time of her yahrzeit is also like a tzaddik's yahrzeit, that is Poil Yeshua's B'kerev ha'aretz. So now he's going to explain how the Rebbetzon's avodah affected the entire world. So we're going to go to the last paragraph on this page, Ois Beis. V'hinei balus ha'yahrzeit yom zeh, the one whose yahrzeit is today, on Vav Tishri, my mother, the Rebbetzon, Allah Shalom, Zachsa B'davar Nifla, she merited an unbelievable thing, Shalom Maiseha V'Avodeseha, that her actions and her service, Yesh Teitzaros B'Yachas L'Chol Olam Kuloi, there are results and consequences for the entire world. Shahoidis law, thanks to her, Loim Dimnei Yisrael B'chol Tfutzas HaGeulah Ada Yom Hazeh Divri Chassidus Pnimis HaTorah, that Jewish people in all these scattered places of the exile learn till this day words of Chassidus, the inner part of the Torah, Shebahem U'Bekesher Lam is B'Adam Gam Minyan the Nigla Torah, that in those words of the Pnimis HaTorah and in connection with them is explained also matters of the revealed part of the Torah. The Hainu, this is referring to Hachidushe Torah Shal Amur, the Torah insights and Chidushim of my father, Shabola de Gili B'Dyoy Al Anyar, that these insights of my father came revealed in ink on paper, B'Schus Baal HaYartzeit, in the merit of one whose yahrzeit is today, on Vav Tishrei, the Rebbe's mother. And the Rebbe is going to speak about in detail as we go on in the Sicha about this. Top of the next page, as it's known, Ad Kama Hishtadla V'Is Amtza Kedei Sheyeh Lo D'Yoy V'Nyarchu. How much effort she put in that the Rebbe Levi Yitzchak, the Rebbe's father, should have ink and should have paper. V'Noisav Alza, and in addition to the actual making sure he had ink and paper, V'Iker, and primarily Shesiya B'Kach, she assisted in the fact Sheyeh Lo Yas HaMatzav Ruach HaMasim, as much as possible to put him in the appropriate state of mind, L'Loi Kol Tirdos U'Bulbulim, without any burdens and all types of worries and concerns, Kedei Sheyuchal Lifol U'Lachadish Chidush Torah Kvi Shechidush B'Poil, so he should be able to affect and to come up with new insights in Torah as he actually did. How did she make sure that the Rebbe's father, Rebbe Levik's state of mind was such that he could be mechadish in Torah even then? Aidei kach, through the fact shakasher nishlach Geulah, when the Rebbe's father was sent into exile. Ozva gam hias adira sheba gara kama es rishonim. She also left the home in which she lived in tens of years. V'holcha achrav begeulah, and she followed him into exile. Kedei liyas be'ezrosai, to be in his assistance b'makom hagolus, in the place of exile, l'sayeh aloi, and to assist him l'hamshich b'avodasai, to continue in his work. By the way, this was not necessarily unusual occurrence. Going into exile in Russia was like almost like going to prison, and especially in the horrible conditions that it was in the Soviet Union in general, and it was in that city of exile where the Rebbe's father was. Many families whose husbands went into exile, the wife did not follow them for just the very basic thing. It was a very, very terrible situation to find oneself in. But still, in all, despite that, the Rebbetzin Chana gave up her own relative comforts of home and followed her husband Reb Leivik, and the Rebbe says in the parentheses how terribly devoid the place was where the Rebbe's father went to. It's called Chile, not in South America, it's in southern Russia. That was completely devoid of Jews and Yiddishkeit and Torah study, and people didn't even know what a Jew was over there. Let's skip the parentheses 4 lines. And she went, despite all this difficulty, she went to a far-flung place in Russia in those days, a place that there would be a great lack in all necessities, and she would obviously not have the funds to be able to purchase anything additional, to such a degree, to such a degree they didn't even have any ink or paper. And one whose yahrzeit it is, the Rebbetzin Chana, had to herself pick herbs and grasses and to make them into ink and to collect different little small pieces of paper, etc. As a side note, the people that went into the Rebbe's Yechidus and they would write to the Rebbe a letter, and there was at the end of the paper there was a lot of empty space. The Rebbe would often tear off that empty space and like use it, that empty part of the letter, and use it for later on for writing notes, etc., etc. In other words, there was always this attitude of not wasting anything. I digress a little bit, but the Rebbe also closed the light in his office every single time he left his office, even for a short while to go to Mincha, if I remember correctly. And you always knew, the Bachram at least realized, if you were outside the office and you could tell if the light was on or off, that meant that the Rebbe was there or not. It was never on for no reason. And that if the Rebbe wasn't there, the light wasn't on. Anyway, I digress. So, Ubikushi Hisigam Ad Dafim, and with great difficulty, she had managed to collect a few pages, Shaleim Nichtvu Chidushu Torah Shalamur, that on those pages were written in novel interpretations of my father. Valderech Zeh, in a similar vein, Bishulayim Shal Hagilyonis Asfarim Shahayu Tachas Yodei, also on the bottom margins of the copies and the pages of the Sfarim that he had brought with him to exile. From these, both the pages that Rebbe's father had gotten through the effort of the Rebbe's mother, and from those writings that was put together from the ink that the Rebbe's mother put together, that he wrote on the margins of the Sfarim. From this, Nitfus Sfarim L'Kutu Levi Yitzchak V'Toyros Levi Yitzchak Al Torah and Nevi'im Ksuvim Al Marech Chazal. For here was printed those two Sfarim by those names on Tanakh and on different Mamor Chazal, etc. So this was one aspect and component of the Rebbetzin Chana's participation in the spreading of Chassidus. Here the Rebbe goes on to point out another thing as well, unrelated to this well-known idea of the ink, etc., etc. Gimel, yesh lahaisif, shalabal sayar side yesh chele gam ba'avodas haklal shel amur betkufas harabon shalifnei ma'aser v'agolos. The Rebbe Tzachana had also took part in the communal service that the Rebbe's father did during the period when the Rebbe's the Rebbe's father was still a Rav, before he was imprisoned and exiled. That also then she was involved in communal work as a Rebbetzin, and in a broad way, in addition to running her own private life, like running the household, etc. Ha'ir Yekateranislav changed to the name Dnepropetrovsk. It was considered, in some respects, the capital of the entire area of the Ukraine, which was the part of southern Russia. It was considered a main city, a capital city, when it came to all matters of Yiddishkeit. As it's known, that they suffered terribly from persecutions from the government. This was during the 20s and 30s. That different others outside communities had to travel to the capital city of that community, of that country, in other words, to the capital of the Ukraine, which was, to a certain degree, Dnepropetrovsk or Yekaterinoslav, to be able to put in effort by the government officials to nullify the decrees, or at least decrease them. The government said, you local rabbis over here, Yekaterinoslav, keep quiet. Don't get involved in this. Because usually when you come to a foreign city and you're trying to get help in religious stuff, the first person you turn to is the communal leaders, the Rav, etc. The government realized that, and they said to the Rabbanim in the whole town of Yekaterinoslav, in the whole area that was around Yekaterinoslav, don't you dare help any of these people. Don't get mixed into these things. Not only did the government prohibit them from getting involved, the government was forcing the Rabbanim to support their view. Not only that, the government in Yekaterinoslav demanded from the Rabbanim that they should put out a letter that they agree to the fact that the government does not persecute religion, like the Rebbe spoke about many times. This is what the pressure that the government tried to put on the Rabbanim in that town, in that area. So then the Rebbe's father, the Rebbe Levi, came out, Geulah is daitoi, and he made his opinion known. Not only won't he sign on such a letter, the Rebbe says, like some Rabbanim, either because of torture or because of threats, they were forced to sign. He will make sure that everybody it becomes well known that he's not signing. By stating, everybody knows the truth, that the government is persecuting religion. The only thing is that everybody is scared to say it openly. Okay, and the Rebbe's father's approach was, at this time, when it becomes well known that he's not signing, and most probably there will be some that will be encouraged by his not signing, and they will join him in not signing. This thing will make a big tumult. And therefore, automatically, the government will have to start accepting the demands of the Rabbanim to go, not to persecute religious observance. So, and the Reb Leivik was successful. And this is actually what took place. The government caved into many demands, beginning from the demand that they should be able to bake matzah, the food of faith. That at that time a request was sent to Moscow to get a permit to be able to grind wheat in such a manner that the flour will be kosher l'Pesach, skip the parentheses. Since in the area, Ukraine was like the wheat capital of Russia. Since that area, Yekaterinoslav, was a place where wheat grew and barley grew, etc. There were large wheat and flour mills. Therefore, this was very much connected with the Rebbe's father. He was not scared, and he was not, put into a position, he wasn't paralyzed by it all. The Rebbe's father himself traveled to Moscow. He met up with President Kalinin. There was the president of Russia, and there was premier. So President Kalinin he met up with him. Rosh Hamshala Communistis Beisahi, the head of government of the communist government at that time. V'tzliach Lifali was successful in influencing Shekalinin Yitin Rishim V'tzav L'chol P'kidam Hamshol B'Yektrinislav, that Kalinin will give a permit and a command to all the government officials in Yektrinislav Shlo Yisarvu B'Sidrei Tchinas HaKemach, that they will not mix into the entire process of how to grind and mill the wheat. And if the supervisor, the mashgiach that the Rabbi Schneerson appoints, will say that a certain flour is not adequately kosher l'Pesach, they won't use it. Now, in Russia, in the communist Soviet Union, there was something called economic crimes, and that was one of the libels how they managed to arrest citizens for no reasons was to trump up charges that they're trying to ruin the economy of the Soviet Union. Just historically speaking, the communist system was not working, and they were looking for scapegoats, except for the fact they were looking to throw the fear of the communists into everybody's heart. So they invented a new thing, economic crimes, that there are people that are out to undermine the economy of the Soviet Union. So therefore, it wasn't just the Rabbi Schneerson would allow this flour to be considered kosher l'Pesach, or would not allow it be. It was more than that. He could have been accused of sabotaging the Soviet Union economically. Even though that one could complain that through the loss of such a great quantity of flour, when Rabbi Schneerson says that it's not kosher enough, not only is Rabbi Schneerson causing damage, economic loss and hardship in Yekaterinoslav and in the Ukraine, since, like I mentioned before, the Ukraine was like the wheat capital of the Soviet Union. So we're talking about the source where flour would be supplied to the entire country. As a result of loss of wheat that belongs to the government, because everything belonged to the government, that they won't be able to sell it at this more increased price of flour that's kosher LaPesach. So now there is economic damage done to the entire country, and like I said before, this was literally, they used to put people to death over it. The Rebbe's father was not at all taken aback. He right away let it be known. He is not scared to travel to Moscow and to approach them with this demand. Only because the Rebbe's father made it so well known beforehand. So then President Kalinin even had to receive him. He could have ignored him, but he made it well known. He's going to travel to Moscow for this purpose. And not only that, but he had to give in. He had to give the requested permit, along with the command. That particular directive came from Moscow all the way to Yekaterinoslav, and that directive, it was said, no one is allowed to appoint supervisors over the flour, and no one is allowed to tell the appointed mashgichim what to do. They do not have to report to anyone about what they are doing, except for Rabbi Schneerson. Can you imagine in the Soviet Union, where religion was being persecuted, the government told government officials in Yekaterinoslav that a government concern of a flour mill that belonged to the government should be directed by what Rabbi Schneerson said, and no one else can become involved. This is mind-boggling. If Rabbi Schneerson will establish that certain flour that was milled and ground from wheat that reached this particular place on that particular day, and he says that that particular shipment einenu kosher l'shtamish b'lemasla Pesach, yes, l'shmoy also. If he rules it's not kosher to use it for Pesach matzah, you got to listen to whatever he says, and either return it, he says in the parentheses, or to sell it cheaper or whatever. Next paragraph, v'chol zeh shari. How does this have to do with the Rebbe's mother? So it said, behind every great man, this was all possible b'schus ha'uvda. This was all because of the fact in his close proximity, in his own home, there was an appropriate state that was supportive. Not only did my mother, the Rebbetzin Chana, she wasn't fearful herself, that if she would have been fearful, this would have transmitted to him as well, to the Rebbe's father. But just the opposite. The Rebbetzin Chana gave the Rebbe's father additional encouragement and strengthened his spirit, not to take in consideration all the danger. At the very time, according to the state in that country in those days, for such a crime, they wouldn't just arrest the perpetrator himself, they wouldn't just convict and prosecute the Rav himself, the Rebbe's father, Alagamas Kolbnei Beis, his entire family, his entire household, beginning from his wife that's living in his home and assisting him. Shem counter-revolutionaries, they're anti-mapchonim, they are counter-revolutionaries. Urbezainam ligram nezik lakal samadina canal, and they wish to cause economic damage to the country. And the truth was, even after the government from Moscow sent directives to the local government in Yekaterinoslav, there were still those trying to undermine those orders and find ways to attack Rebleivik over following his own conscience in this. See, the Rebbe goes down and says, "V'omnam bein hapkidim ha'elu hayu ka'elu she'ishmiu iyumim." Amongst the officials in Yekaterinoslav, there are those that threatened or let it be known amongst their own that this is not going to end well for the rabbi. There were such a degree that there were friends of the Rebbe's father that were worried about these officials making good on their threats. And they came by night in secret to let the Rav know about what these officials are planning and saying about him. Though even notifying the Rav about it was a criminal offense in their eyes. Thanks to their connections with the secret police, they became known. In other words, they got information about what these officials are planning. And they used to give additional reports. They would explain why they're reporting, sometimes they're not reporting. As the situation was then, and the Rebbe in the parentheses goes into further details, etc. Okay, let's go on further. The second paragraph, Ois Daled. Let us return to our point that we said. Shall bavoidus amur, the part of the one whose yahrzeit is throughout all of her life in the work of of the Rebbe's father, gam kasher hoyu begoila, even when they were in exile, b'makom shloyadu klaloidus Yehudim v'yadus, in a place that they did not at all even know. The people around it didn't even know about Yidna Yiddishkeit, or matzav kosher begashmi is in a very difficult state physically, materially. Kasher loyhoya kesef liknes shum meisers, when there was no money to buy anything extra. Meisers usually is translated as luxuries, but I think the Rebbe literally means anything extra than just literally bread and heating, etc. And primarily concerning what the Rebbetzin helped with in this regard was loyhoya sham dioiv loynyar. There was no ink and no paper. V'hi atzma holcha v'asva asavim. She herself went and collected herbs and grass, and she turned it into ink. She went and searched for tiny slips of paper. I think maybe she took cigarette paper. I might be confusing it. The Frierdiker Rebbe might have, in prison, they used to give the Frierdiker Rebbe some cigarettes, and he used to unfurl it and use the cigarette paper. Maybe that was also something that the Rebbetzin got. Like she related afterwards, even getting the ink through all these herbs and getting these small pieces of paper, even that was involved with matters of self-sacrifice. Let's skip the brackets. Just like she put in effort to write down these Chidush Torah, so too she put in the effort concerning guarding these manuscripts after she left Almata, where the Rebbe's father is buried. She came to Moscow, but in the end, because of the situation of her escape, she couldn't take them along with her when she left the country, since she went under false papers as a Polish citizen, like it's known, the whole story with Eshalonin and all the false documents that Lubavitch Chassidim used to be able to get out of Russia after the war of Chol and the Sicha Kasha. The whole travel was difficult, and she had to leave those writings, manuscripts behind, and there were certain ones that were, the Rebbe next paragraph says that many of them didn't even get out of Russia, and some of them they managed to get to the American embassy or other embassies, and through that get it out of Russia, etc., etc. Let's skip the whole lengthy things, the whole lengthy details about that. That how dangerous it was for anybody to hold on to them in Russia. And the Rebbe says we don't know what happened with tens and maybe hundreds of pages of Chidushei Torah of the Rebbe's father that's somewhere in Russia that we still need to track down. Let's skip to the last paragraph on the page. V'yirotzen sh'bi the will of Hashem sheben meshech hazman yikuyim hayud, that over this time we should be already fulfilled what we foretold. And those that are lost in the land of Assyria, and those that are flung away in the land of Egypt. And so that is talking about human beings. But if human beings will be gathered from their far-flung places and the place that are lost, how much more so insights of Torah will also be gathered from their lost places, especially novel insights in Torah that were written in a state of out of the straits and confinements, a true and great constraint in the physical sense. In addition to this, Chidushei Torah, novel insights in Torah, sheyesh behem hein nigla v'hein b'pnimis ha-Torah. They have both the revealed part and the inner part of Torah. B'zeh gufa pnimis ha-Torah ba'ifna muchen li'futzamay sacha chutza, the inner part of the Torah in a way that's ready to have your well springs of the Baal Shem Tov be spread outward. K'fi she'roim b'chidushim shnitfusum v'masher nirshim b'guyonis hasfarim shegili yadeinu, like we see in the novel interpretations that were printed from what was transcribed in those margins of the Sfarim that did reach us. From that we could extrapolate and assume that the other writings are also in such a way of spreading the Torah of Pnimis HaTorah, even though we haven't actually seen it because they have not reached us. Let's skip the next paragraph to the third paragraph on the page. The very resolution that we resolve and we make a good resolution to learn these new topics. It speeds up the time that we'll be able to search after these manuscripts. Also in that country, to find them. In addition to this, and primarily the bringing close and speeding up the time of the novel interpretations by Pnimis HaTorah in the inner part of Torah that's following the true and complete redemption. How much more so it will be meriting to the revelation of these novel interpretations that they were written. If Moshiach comes, we're going to have great novel interpretations in the inner part of Torah. So for sure, things that were already written before Moshiach's times will become revealed. They're located in somewhere that's not unknown, but surely they exist. And the Rebbe goes on to connect it with the Rebbetzon's name concerning the Geulah. We could add in the connection of the one whose yahrzeit to the revelation of the manuscripts of the inner part of the Torah, according to what it's known, that the name has significance and brings about the the activities of the one that does the name. Hashem Chana Kosher B'Haftorah Yom Shal Rosh Hashanah. The name Chana is connected with the Haftorah of the first day of Rosh Hashanah. That the conclusion of the Haftorah of the first day of Rosh Hashanah is that the principle of the Moshiach will be raised up. And not only that, in addition to the end of the Haftorah, and the Nevuah Chana, Haftorah Zu, the Nevuah, the prophecy of Chana, that's this Haftorah, Medaberes the Shmuel HaNavi, Shemena Ascholos HaNevuah B'Yisrael. It's in this Haftorah, it speaks about Shmuel HaNavi. From him begins the prophecy amongst the Yidden, Vu Moshiach David Malcham Mashiach Melech, and he is the one that anointed David, King Mashiach, as a Melech. Another idea of the name Chana, it's also connected. It's the Rosh Tevis of the three mitzvahs that have a special connection with women. And the Rebbe says, Chala, Piloshna, Kosav, Reisha, Sechem, Chala. According to the expression of the pasuk, it says the first of your dough should be given Chala. And challah, even though it's one particular part of our eating and just has to do with the bread that we eat and the baked goods that we give a portion of it to the kohen, but in a broader sense, challah is kol kashas achila v'shtia b'chlal. It includes the kosher idea of eating and drinking in general. The letter Hey of the name Chana, Zadlok Saner, Shemevi L'Shalom Bayis, Kol Bayis Kula. It's the lighting of Shabbos Yom Tov candles that brings peace to the entire home. Pi'el Shmer of Shabbos, Lar of Shabbos, Kimeduba Kampamim, and it influences and affects not just the peace of the home on Shabbos, but just like Sada's candles actually, Sada Menus candles and Rivka Menus candles actually burned from Shabbos to Shabbos. In a similar vein, spiritually, the Shabbos candle lighting, the Rebbe says, of a Jewish woman every Shabbos lingers and lasts the peace in the home from Shabbos to Shabbos. The middle nun has to do with the mitzvah of Taras Mishpacha. All the three things are primarily within the domain of women, even though men are also obligated in it, but it's primarily within the purview of women. Let's skip over to the next page. Second paragraph on the next page. Ubechol oifen, b'amdeinu b'yam yahrzeit, standing in the day of the yahrzeit of the Rebbe's Nechan, the Rebbe's mother. Tzarech li, it's a kol echad v'achas, has to be by every single one. Anoshim, noshim v'taf, men, women, and children. Tesefes, zirus, v'cholachas, m'gimel mitzvahs elu, an additional alacrity and care in each one of these three mitzvahs, that their inner content matters to the entire life of a person in general, and the life of a Yid specifically. And the general bond, the connection that the soul has with the body is affected through eating and drinking, which is the mitzvah of challah. In addition to bread to eat, that has to be kosher. A person needs a home to live in. So that the home should be worthy of being a home, or so that the house should be worthy of being a home. There has to be the idea of kindling the Shabbos candles that affect peace in the home. What's the ultimate perfection of a home? The mitzvah of Taras Mashpacha that brings to the birth of children the way they're supposed to be born. Sons and daughters are involved in Torah mitzvahs. We're going to skip to the next page. When each and every one of us and of you, amongst Klal Yisrael, will raise himself and his entire surroundings above the mountains and the heights of the earth. This itself will add in the success that Hashem gives our success. All the obstacles will cease. To fulfill all the good resolutions in actuality. Additional, and that is primary. Shakadosh Baruch Hu Yemayir, Hashem will speed up. A Toisves Zero is an additional alacrity, as a Geulah mitzvah shleim in the true and complete redemption. And the prophecy at the conclusion of the Haftarah of Chana, that he will raise up the principle of his Moshiach, the sky and B'poil will actually be fulfilled in actuality, L'mata Masor Tvachim, below 10 handbreadths, U'ba'ofen Demara Ba'atzboi V'omer Zeh, in such a way that you can actually point your finger and say this, Hine Moshiach, behold, here is his Moshiach, Hine Keren Moshiach, here is the principle of Moshiach. Skip the parentheses. Va'kereni Ba'ofen, the Yodrum, that the horn is in a way that, the principle is in a way that he raises it up, in a raising up and being elevated in comparison to the previous year, and even in comparison to the previous days in that year that was called Shnas Nisim by the Rebbe Tafshin Nun. It will be even a raising up in comparison to the prior 6 days. This is the 6th day of the year of the Aseres Yemei Tshuva. Shem Rov Aseres Yomim, that the 6 days are the majority of the 10 days of Tshuva. Only in a way that's appropriate for the conclusion of the 6 days. When we're entering the 7th day of the Aseres Yemei Tshuva, that has a special connection with Shabbos Tshuva, the day that it will be everlasting rest forever and ever, the coming of Moshiach. And all this by accepting, all this takes place by accepting the resolutions, and beginning to fulfill them immediately. In actuality, then surely Hashem will do in actuality down here below 10 handbreadths. They'll raise up the principle of his Mashiach, take from Yad Mamish immediately, b'chol hapratim, and all the details, Hacham, Vayarem, and Keren, Mashiach, the David Malchim Mashiach, beginning from he'll raise up, and the principle and his Mashiach of the David King Mashiach, V'adl Mashiach Tzidkenu, until Mashiach Tzidkenu, Yechida the Klal Yisrael, the Yechida of the entire Klal Yisrael, Shemiskasher, B'Yechida Aprot, Shcholech V'ach Yisrael, that's bound up in the individual Yechida of every individual Yid, because to such a degree that every single Jew has a portion of Mashiach. And so too, on the other hand, in the soul of every single person, there is a spark of the Yechid of Mashiach. This begins from the children of Yeshiva, that about them it says, do not touch my anointed ones. The Tamadover, why are they called my anointed ones? Because they are the children of the house of their master, and they're connected with their master. The connection of children with their Rebbe, with their teachers, through the righteous women of Yidden. What is the merit of the women? By bringing their children to read Torah in the place of learning. The children of Yeshiva would learn in front of the Rebbes in the shul. In a similar vein, they are also influencing their husbands. Like it's explained also in Masechtas Brachos in the page Yud Zayin, which is numerical equivalent of good. Let's skip the parentheses. Should be the will of Hashem. From speaking about all these matters, he take from miyad will be immediately marabatz boy v'omer. He points with his finger and he says this. Hine vayorim. Here we see the raised up. Hine hakeren. Here we see the principle. V'hine Mashiach. Here behold, see Mashiach. David Malch Mashiach. David the King Mashiach. Geulah Rishon, Geulah Achron, the first Redeemer is the final Redeemer. By Yorim Karen Mashiach, he will raise up the principle of his Mashiach. The Asiri Year Kodesh, the 10th is holy. V'oidvu ha'ikar take from Yad Mamish, that the primary thing is immediately Mamish. He's talking about the 10th because in the parenthesis before he spoke about there are 10 kronis. There's 10 places where we speak about the level of keren, of the principle, and that's what he's connecting it with the number 10.